Hello, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for waiting. We're just a few minutes late today. So I'm Hugh Stewart and I'm going to present our roundup of last week's big stories. This is a full Scottish. Now today I've got two excellent guests, and in a couple of minutes I'm going to ask him to look at 5 big topics from the last week. First of all, down in London we've got Dr. Mike Galsworthy is on, and Mike is a member of Scientists for the EU. Good afternoon, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Right, and thanks for waiting. Okay, and Inverness now, the Member of Parliament for the area for Inverness and Badenoch, and I missed one out. Sorry, Drew Hendry. How are you today?
Very good, thanks. It's Inverness there in Badenoch and Strathspey, just to give people the full title.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, I'm going to run through the latest updates from Russia's invasion of its neighbour Ukraine, which today brings us to day 151. I'll quickly run through the main points today, and then we're going to look at the other stories from the news. Day 151 of Russia's attack in Ukraine, and Russia has targeted Ukraine's main port of Odessa, through which grain shipments were supposed to take place now. A cruise missile strike attacked the city barely 12 hours after Moscow had signed a deal with Ukraine to allow monitored grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Ukrainian President Zelensky said that the strikes on Odessa show that Russia cannot keep its promises. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has condemned the Russian attack against Odessa, accusing Russia of deepening the world food shortage. Ukraine's Defence Ministry has urged citizens in Enerhodar to reveal where Russian troops are living among the local population and to identify who is collaborating with the occupying authorities. The governor of Zaporizhia has said that Russia is keeping 170 people captive in the Zaporizhia Oblast, the Kiev Independent reports. According to the governor, Alexander Staruk, Russian forces have abducted at least 415 people in the southern region since February, when Russian troops invaded Ukraine, and at least 170 individuals are still being kept captive. The United Nations HCR says that 3.7 million Ukrainian refugees have received temporary protection in the European Union. In a new report released today, the UNHCR cited that 3.7 million Ukrainians have registered for temporary protection or similar national protection schemes in Europe. Video footage has emerged of a powerful explosion that took place in the Russian-occupied territory of Horlivka Saturday in the Donetsk Oblast, according to Euromaidan. Reports from outlets have been complaining that Ukrainian armed forces have hit a Russian ammunition depot. The former Deputy Secretary of Ukraine's Security Council has been suspected of high treason, the Kyiv Independent reports. According to a statement released on Saturday by the Ukrainian State Bureau of Intelligence, Vladimir Sivkovich is suspected of collaborating with Russian intelligence services managing a network of agents in Ukraine who were spying on behalf of Russia. Ukraine's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has called for US-Russian peace talks to end the war in Ukraine, lashing out at the European Union's strategy on the conflict. In a speech in Romania on Saturday, the 59-year-old right-wing leader of Hungary also outlined his vision of what he called an unmixed Hungarian race. Orban has condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, but maintains an ambiguous position on the conflict. That's the latest in Russia's war against Ukraine. And now Drew Hendry and Mike Galsworthy, thank you for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to begin with looking at that Ukraine story. So we were hearing last week that Turkey was mediating in talks between Russia and Kyiv to try and get those Ukrainian grain shipments taking place. We had heard at the end of last week that Russia had agreed to let some of the grain exports out, and then no sooner had they done that than they launched a missile attack on the port of Odessa. So what does that say about Russia's respect for international law? Drew Hendry, what lessons can we learn from that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to underline this is about $10 billion worth of grain that's at stake here. It's the lives of millions of people. This is food that's required. And, the deal that was struck was very important to make sure that could get out. And Russia playing fast and loose with these things is not in any way the correct way to behave. That this is clearly, a bit like a game to Putin and the Russians involved in this, and it shouldn't be happening this way. The deal was set up so that Ukraine could move the grain out, that the Turkish authorities would inspect the Ukrainian ships to make sure they weren't moving weapons back and forth, and that it was grain. There was nothing wrong with this. Very complex to set up, and to say the least, extremely disappointing that Russia have behaved in this way just hours after signing this protracted deal. And I think at a time when international law should really be absolutely paramount. I know we'll come on to talk about what's happening in the UK over international law later, but this is why international law is so important. It has to be obeyed if we're going to have any kind of civilized exchange of goods, particularly when it's so vital for people who will be under. Again, I'm using very soft terms, being under extreme pressure if this grain doesn't reach them.
And Dr. Mike Galsworthy, what do you think about Russia's stance here when they sign an international agreement and then, well, they haven't actually broken the agreement, but they have, what do you think is the message they're saying? We'll let grain out, but don't forget, we can still shell you anytime we like. What are they saying about law? Are they saying that we'll accept it when it suits us, but we've got a big artillery, so it doesn't necessarily apply to us?
I think Russia is deliberately being a menace. It's a it's a tactic that they have used before. If you remember earlier in the war, when they made promises or made agreements to safe corridors out of some of the cities for people that wanted to flee those zones, and then they would deliberately either bomb those safe corridors or even mine them. And this was a tactic that dates back even before Ukraine to Russian behavior in Syria. What they want to do, I'm guessing psychologically with this, is up the value of something and then show that they can destroy it, thus increasing alarm on the side of their opponents, but also increasing their perceived power and their ability to menace and their ability, I guess they think, to haggle in future. So what was happening here, I think, is that it was known in a lot of political circles that because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, it is called, and Russia has a supply of food as well, Russia's becoming increasingly alarmed because it's being boxed in by the whole world. And what the rest of the world wants to do is isolate this conflict to Ukraine and Russia, and then help Ukraine beat Russia just in this conflict and have no other ramifications for the rest of the world. Russia don't want that to happen. They want to cause alarm everywhere around the world and have that be their leverage. Now, we were on course because of the disruption in Ukraine to have starvation likely to happen across many third countries that were dependent on Ukrainian exports of food. But that has sort of slipped off people's radar. So by having a big conference whereby you come to this big agreement about supply of food, and then there's hooray and celebrations from a lot of the Western world, and then deliberately destroying it and nixing it, it makes sure that everyone in the world knows about this, is talking about this, feels alarmed by this, feels angry by this. But then Russia has reestablished that this is a dynamic in which they hold a lot of power and menace. So I think that's the motivation and drive behind it. I don't know how well it ultimately serves their purposes, though. But clearly, they have no respect for lives and other countries that are going to get it for this dynamic, and they have no respect for law. This is pure mafia-style gaming with international law and with international lives, and they are in a desperate place, and they're trying to make it more alarmed and more widespread.
Yes,
That's how I read it.
I think so. Yes, I was going to ask Guru. Do you think did Russia actually respond to international pressure during the week when they actually made the agreement with President Erdogan of Turkey. As Dr. Galsworthy was saying, that Russians were clearly using grain as a chess piece. But were they alarmed, do you think, about the amount of international condemnation they were getting through the week when they actually agreed that deal?
Well, I think the answer to that is clearly no. I think Mike's absolutely right. They're being very calculated in how they approach all of this. They're entrenched. They're determined to carry on as they've been carrying on, which is in a disgusting and disgraceful way. And, I think this is just the way they do. I don't think they necessarily react in the way that we think people will react to external pressures. I think we have an issue over understanding the way that, Putin's set of the people around him actually think. And the way they act, and every time that we would expect them to honour something or take what we would see as a logical choice, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to look at this regime. It's certainly not the right way to look at Putin. So in short, again, I don't think they would have been necessarily reacting to international pressure. I think they're driving forward what they think will get them the best gain, whether that's short or medium term.
Now, just finally, before we move on, Mike Galsworthy, I wonder what the Russian view is on international law, because the reason I'm asking is the last time I watched Russia Today, before it was taken off the air, I saw a Russian academic basically saying that international courts, United Nations, all of that is Western propaganda. So this academic, I forget who it was actually dismissing it. Do you think that's a Russian attitude, that there's something... in some way, international law is really a Western plot to undermine Russia?
Yeah, totally. They think it's all a stitch up, and they say so in the language of, we currently have a unipolar world, and that is unbalanced. We need a more multipolar world. And what they mean by that is that the laws and the systems as they stand have been taken over and controlled by the US and Europe, and then other countries around the world falling into line. So essentially, America can go and commit whatever sins it likes in the Middle East, and that's okay because America controls the world. But should any other country dare to invade its neighbor for its own protection and act similarly, then suddenly the whole world slaps them down. And they think that is unfair. They think everyone should have the right to try and build a little empire around them that they can bully and so forth and so on. And that would actually represent a more balanced world. So part of what they're trying to do here is to prove that they can mix things up, that they do have power, they can put millions of lives under threat, and they are an axis that should be feared and respected on that basis. And that is what they're trying to prove. The system is stitched up against them. They are going to cause everyone alarm until they get enough respect.
Okay, getting into a situation then where you think everyone else is against you, that brings me to Brexit now, and to the problems that the French have apparently been creating at the port of Dover. But we'll come on to that in a minute. But before, the other aspect of Brexit I wanted to discuss is the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I heard Liz Truss, hoping to be Prime Minister in a few weeks, saying today that she is pushing through as soon as Parliament gets back again, she's pushing through the bill to rewrite the Northern Ireland Protocol, which Britain agreed with the European Union. So their willingness to abandon that agreement, which was negotiated by former Prime Minister Johnson, what does that say about Britain's support for international law, Drew Hendry?
Well, this is what I was alluding to earlier. When we've got Putin behaving as he is, and showing that he's so willing to break international law, it's really important that those states who are standing up around lead by example. And this, unfortunately, is one where the Tories are definitely not leading by example. They've shown time and time again they're perfectly willing to break international law. That's not a good look internationally. It's not a good result for people in the island of Ireland. And it's not a good thing for any of us. These are treaties that have been signed in good faith. Or at least should have been signed in good faith. And remember, this was supposed to be Brexit done. This was supposed to be an oven-ready deal that was a great deal that Boris Johnson and his supporters were talking about. But, this is like everything that the Brexiteers have brought forward. It's, the results of it are absolutely nothing like they said. This was all supposed to be so easy, all supposed to save so much money. And it's not... going that way by any measure. It's going absolutely in the other direction. They wanted to set up this deal. Now they say that this was their deal. Now they're saying that they want to break it because it's somebody else's fault. This is just typical repeat behaviour. But to bring it back to the point about international law, it's so important that the law is recognised and obeyed internationally, and this is just the UK showing that it's willing to trample all over that.
Yes, and Mike Galsworthy, the protocol with Northern Ireland was a compromise deal which actually gives Northern Ireland the best of two worlds. They are still in the Union, which I suppose about 50% of their electors voted for, but they're also still in a single market. But that was the agreement which Johnson made. So. And whose interests is he trying to break that agreement, which actually, as far as I can see, most people in Northern Ireland are benefiting from? Do you agree?
Yeah, totally. And to give a Scottish related quote in order to summarize where he and Liz Truss are, I give you this line from Macbeth. I'm in blood, stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as to go o'er. And essentially, where this government is with Brexit is that it's got itself in a hell of a pickle. And instead of trying to undo the pickle and take on the ERG and take on the DUP in order to come back on it and get to a sensible place, they have got themselves wound into it so much that now they find that the new murders lined up before them that they have to go through with are breaking international law and going not only against the will of the people in Northern Ireland, as per not just polling, but also their recent elections, where they returned representatives that are by majority pro-protocol. And yet they are still saying that in their interest, we in Westminster are going to make the decision to break international law for their sake. And it's really quite a daft situation, but they find it very hard to get back out of where they are. So, and that is going to cause them so many headaches to go forward. Clearly, what they should do is say, we made this agreement. We agreed to the whole principle and framework of it. Of course, we've got the shared interest to make things move across the borders more easily. We can work with the European Union on that. Within the framework of it, we'll exhaust all of those. And DUP, you're just going to have to suck it up. You're no longer the majority power in Northern Ireland anymore. This is just where we are. And also with the ERG, give it up, guys. You've got your Brexit and your star chamber at the time of Boris Johnson's deal coming back, his oven-ready deal coming back. Your star chamber of lawyers said that this deal is good. This deal is sweet. This deal preserves UK sovereignty. That is what they said. So these two parties, the DUP and the ERG, should, for the cleanest solution, be forced by this government to suck it up, and that is actually the shortest way to get to a pragmatic resolution, which then is also of economic benefit to the not just Northern Ireland, but to the UK as a whole, and to Europe as a whole, and to peace and harmony. But they won't, because they've got themselves stuck in crazy lane where the only way is forward, and that way forward goes through breaking international law, breaking the democratic mandate of people in Northern Ireland, breaking good relations with the EU, breaking good relations with the US, and a whole load of other factors, including my particular passion, which is science and our relationship on the science program, is going to get knocked sideways from all of this stupidity going forward as well. But that's where they are, in blood, step so far.
They've got themselves into it. It's also another example of if you're in the hole, keep digging. Now, Drew, Hendry, the Scottish Government put forward a proposal right at the start of Brexit. I think it was called Scotland's Place in Europe, which really would have been a Scottish version of the Northern Ireland Protocol. But that wasn't even read. I don't think there was an official response, but the Scottish Government argued that we could kind of remain in a single market, even if we're still in the Union. So maybe the Northern Ireland deal proves that could have been done in Scotland, couldn't it?
Well, indeed, and we've seen Northern Ireland trade benefit greatly from the situation that's been set up there, and as I've said, it's almost unbelievable. If you weren't watching this government operating in the way that it's operating every day, you wouldn't believe this is, in isolation, that they're willing to look at doing these things, setting up their own deal and then just scrapping it. But to come back to the point about Scotland's place in Europe, this was the Scottish Government trying to engage with Westminster, saying if you've done this stupid thing, go ahead with Brexit, which Scotland voted overwhelmingly against. Every local authority area, 62% of the vote to remain. If you've done this stupid thing, don't do it in this stupid way, and do this for us as opposed to only for Northern Ireland, so that we can have frictionless trade. We can see our trade continue. Now we've got figures showing that our fruit and vegetable exports, for example, to the EU are down 53%. Dairy and eggs are down 33%, and we've got crippling problems in our food industry through a lack of labour because of the immigration policies that have been brought in by the UK government as part of their ongoing hostile environment, but definitely part of their Brexit hostile environment as well. So this has been absolutely hammering Scottish businesses. It's been hammering Scottish farmers. I'm going at a wee sidetrack here, but there's more to come with the odious New Zealand and Australia trade deals, which are only going to bring disadvantage to our farming, fishing and forestry communities. They can't bring any benefits for a tiny increase in trade compared to what we're losing through EU trading. We could have had so much better. It wouldn't have been what we wanted. It wouldn't have been what we voted for, but it could have been so much better if they'd listened. But, it's a matter of historical record now. They haven't listened. They don't listen. They won't listen. And now we see Truss and Sunak, saying they're going to go ahead with these plans. So there's no learning curve down there, no respect for Scotland, no looking out for the needs of the Scottish people, or indeed the needs of the people of the rest of the nations of the UK. This is just a massive act of UK self-harm.
Well, I guess not too many Scottish people will be driving to Dover anytime soon, but I used to live in the Midlands and I frequently went to France, and the procedure is follows. You go down the M1, you go down the M25, then you go along the M20, and you wave your passport at somebody and you drive off the ferry at Calais the other way. And so I'm old enough to remember when you used to have to stop and get your passports checked. But it's back to the future with Brexit, isn't it? So Mike Galsworthy, who would have predicted that leaving a single market would have caused passport delays at Europe?
Everyone who had a look at it. So this is no surprise. People knew this was coming. It was said this was coming. There were proposals put to the UK government about expanding the capacity of French officials to be able to check passports should this occur, and the government rejected it. And so now that it has occurred, because we've taken ourselves out of the system and caused a third country border with France, so they do now have to check and stamp passports. It's bizarre to see some of our government blaming France and throwing blame at France and the French officials. Yes, they can fix the problem. They're given more resources to fix it from the UK government and the French government, and maybe we can adapt to make it easier. But there is something fundamental which has changed, and that is that The procedure is longer now because we don't have the same agreements that we had before. And that comes as a sudden bottleneck because a lot of the increase in flow has happened while we've been in the EU, while we had these agreements to just wave on people through. So instead of, as we had before, having contracts and agreements to solve problems, our government now seems to think that the way to solve problems is shouting abuse at our neighbours that they must fix problems for us. Which, as you say, seems very much back to the future and an old sort of English colonial mentality about how other countries need to come to heel for our ease, which, as an Englishman myself, I feel terribly embarrassed about and really annoys me because I prefer that aspect of the English that is meant to be about common sense, diplomacy, fair play, and actually being intellectually somewhat respectable. So it's dead frustrating. And our government has got itself to blame, but of course they're not going to do that. And they're going to carry on down the same path of saying it's everyone else's fault because they can make life easier for us and it will be in their own interest to do so.
Yes,
And that's where we
that
are.
was always Boris Johnson's argument, wasn't it? They need to sell us BMWs, they need to sell us Prosecco, so they will
Yeah,
fall
it's
in.
the Brexit attitude all the way through. Of course, they'll behave as we want them to behave because it's in their interest to do so. So, hold on. Who is going to decide what is in their interests? Is it going to be Brexiteers mouthing off on our little island, or is it going to be them and their whole governments, 27 nations getting together with all of their analytical power and deciding for themselves what is in their interests? And of course, it's going to be the latter. And so the way that we guarantee what's in our interests is by making contracts by which we all try to guarantee our own interests. We have pulled those contracts away. Rather than getting angry about the chaos, we need to think about new contracts and new arrangements that calmly and pragmatically serve their interests according to them and serve our interests according to us.
And of course, it's in the European interest to maintain a single market. The 27 want to keep that going. In fact, it was set
sure.
up by Britain. Well, not by Britain, but Britain was a leading player in creating the single market. So clearly, the 27 don't want to throw that away. But Drew, let's take up that point
And
on blaming the other side. Now,
the
before we get
borders and
into
the boundaries of that market.
whether that works as a strategy for Liz Truss, because I did hear her saying that this morning, it's the French fault. Let's just look at the facts. You probably all heard the French deputy, the French MP for that area, for the area around Calais, saying today that, well, first of all, the Port of Dover is very small. He says it's only about a quarter or a third the size of Calais. It's only got a certain number of kiosks where the police can stand. There's maybe 20 of them, but all 20 of them are occupied. So they're staffing it 100%. So in response to saying it's our fault you're not doing your job properly, he says we're using every facility that the
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not the fault of the EU. It's not the fault of the French. It's quite clearly, and everybody will say this, including the management at the Port of Dover, it's quite clearly the fault of Brexit. This is something that was voted for. It's quite bizarre that the Brexiteers should put forward this proposition, say that they want to get rid of free movement and then complain when free movement disappears. I covered transport for the SNP at Westminster between 2015 and 2017 before this all unfolded. And even at that time, we're saying, look, if you're going to do this, these are the outcomes that you can expect. This is the attitude to borders that you're going to have. And you made a point just now that we've lost access now, free movement across 27 borders. We should remember that when we're talking about Scotland's position in the future. And also, I think one of the other interesting thing is to ask, to start putting Westminster under pressure about what it's going to do with its borders in the future, because quite clearly it can't continue to behave in the way it's behaving. It's, as I've said earlier, an act of UK self-harm to continue going down that particular road. And I think they're in a really dangerous place. Mike was talking about that inability to turn around and say that they've got things wrong so that they can actually correct this. They can only go on and continue to make it worse. And I think that's going to be the direction of travel for some time. But again, this is not the fault of the EU. It's certainly not the fault of the French. This has been well documented. The difficulties at borders have been laid out since before the referendum on the European Union. The difficulties are laid out after the result of that referendum, and laid out ever since through the so-called negotiations that led to where we are at the moment. This was always going to be a problem. It was delayed a bit by the pandemic, and now that people are trying to move around as they would normally, we're seeing the results of that.
So there has been polling, for example, around the Northern Ireland Protocol and who people blame for that impasse. And what you generally find is that for the over 65s, it's blame the EU, but for everyone else, it seems to be blame our government. So that also lines up reasonably well with the Conservative voting support demographics. So the country is divided on the issue, but the Tory faithful will blame the EU. They generally seem to share that same attitude of oh, we were put in a box and we're doing our best to get the country out whole and in peace without the EU taking away a chunk of it. And I think that's a bizarre way to see it. I think it completely lacks objectivity, and I find it very sad. And I think it's going to be the same thing for the border with France. It's going to be a case that the Tory demographic is going to be on board with that mentality. Yep.
Well, they're talking to their audience. They're talking to themselves. They're talking in ever decreasing circles with what they're doing at the moment. These none of their proposals, none of their continuing, as I say, I'm going to say it again, none of the continuing self-harm they're doing across the nations of the UK is going to change from anything that they've said or any actions that they've demonstrated. So I don't think this is going to get into a better place with either of those candidates who, frankly, are not worthy of becoming prime minister of anywhere. With it. Just a quick point on what we were discussing just now, though. This was supposed to be Brexit was supposed to be about taking back control. How can you say you've taken back control, you've got Brexit done, and then blame the French, and blame the EU, and blame everybody else for the fact that you can't get things done? The fact is that they've got themselves into a position where they've got less say, less control, and that was always going to be a result of taking this move over Brexit. And the way they've done it means they've got even less influence and less ability to deal with things. They set up their own problems. But Sunak and Truss are going to continue down the same path. They're boxed in. They've got no manoeuvre. There's too many ERG MPs in the House of Commons just now forming a bloc to allow them to have any kind of sensible manoeuvres in there. And they'll find that they've got the party that they inherit, the MPs that they inherit will be just as divided as it's been for the past few years.
Yeah, totally. No, I thoroughly agree with what Drew was just saying then. If Brexit was largely driven by victim mentality, which it was, that victim mentality is not going to magically disappear being outside the EU. Even though many of them said, once we get outside, we can no longer blame Brussels. We can no longer blame the rest of Europe because we will be liberated from them. So our civil servants and others cannot use that excuse. Well, how's that looking now? Um, Given that they continue to throw blame even when we're fully out and will continue to do so. So both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are the continuity candidates from this government. Um, Rishi Sunak has been the Chancellor under Boris Johnson. Remember that he actually came into that position when Dominic Cummings tried to stitch up the Chancellor position to have all of its advisors answer directly to number 10. And Sajid Javid said, no self-respecting Chancellor is going to agree to that. I resign. Step up Rishi Sunak, who agreed to it in a heartbeat, and he was captured by Boris Johnson's number 10 and Dominic Cummings at the time, sort of ever since. And so he is not going to represent a strong break from the pattern. He is an original Brexiteer. He believes that free ports are a gift of Brexit. And Liz Truss is even more so, because in order for her to win, she has completely sold her soul, gilded with as much gold as she can find, to the most hardcore of the ERG, to the point whereby they are all backing her because they know that she is a hollow vessel that effortlessly replaces Boris Johnson, and she will do whatever they tell her to do. And so you are going to see no change in behavior from them with regard to some of the main policies. Rishi is going to be more resistant in terms of the balances of when you cut taxes with how you try and tackle the debt. But Liz Truss would basically make noises about, cutting taxes, but then would be bound by pretty much the same dynamics. So you're going to see no change for them from whatsoever.
Now, on the subject of trade deals, because you mentioned earlier on, Drew, Henry, the Liz Truss, of course, is saying that, like me, because I've struck dozens of excellent trade deals. Now, you talked earlier on about importing a cheap, substandard beef from Australia or New Zealand, substandard in the sense that it wouldn't meet EU guidelines. Now, was Brexit all about increasing imports? I thought the aim of government policy was to increase exports. Have I got that wrong?
Well, you haven't got it wrong, but lo and behold, the Westminster government, the whole of Westminster have got it wrong, because they're not only saying that we're not only living with the results of Brexit, which has increased costs for businesses that are, and red tape for businesses that are exporting, but it's increased costs and red tape for businesses that are importing too. Because don't forget, if you want to put something together, to manufacture something, quite often a lot of the components that you get are from different places around the world, many of them in Europe. So there are huge costs, huge extra funds that are being having to be found to pay for taxes coming in for goods coming into the UK by small and medium-sized businesses, which quite frankly frightening and costing jobs and productivity and expansion. But exports are the question you asked about here just now. The great thing about Scotland is that we are an exporting nation. 62% of our exports have been to outside the UK, to the EU and to beyond. The kinds of things that we export within the UK are usually things like services, financial services, likes of oil, gas, renewable energy, those kinds of things that don't actually need border checks. So we're being really hampered by the situation that's been set up by Brexit. These deals, the Australia deal and the New Zealand deal, when you look at the New Zealand press, and there's a great clip going around from the New Zealand broadcasting just now showing how they can't believe that they've got this deal, that this competitive, very, very competitive, larger producer of agricultural products is getting the opportunity to sell its products into the UK, and particularly hitting Scottish farmers and firms. They just can't believe it. This is they're just stunned by the fact that this deal has been done. This will cost businesses tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds per year in terms of lost turnover, but it will actually increase the amount of imports that come in. And as you've said, when you're looking at standards of animal welfare, how they transport live animals, when you're looking at whether or not they're using steroids and other treatments, which they do for imports of beef, when you're looking at all of those different things that are coming in, we're going to be accepting into the UK, again with the rules change through the Internal Market Act, which allows Westminster to ride roughshod over the Scottish Parliament's powers. We're going to be getting these products coming into the UK and coming into Scottish markets, unlabelled in some cases, to compete with the much, much better local produce that we have, and we've no control over it, and we're getting no benefits from it.
Right, I'm going to move on to a political question to Mike. First of all, I think we may have had a problem on sound, so I'm sorry if you can't hear the broadcast. It's good in the studio, but I think there might be something wrong with the internet connection. But if you can still hear me, Mike, I was going to move on to the Tories, back to the Tory leadership. It looks like Boris Johnson's still there, isn't he? He seems to be more difficult to eradicate than rising damp. Do you think Boris Johnson is the first, and what do they call him in the past and future king? That's what I was trying to say. Will Boris Johnson come back as the Prime Minister of England?
I like the way you said of England there. I noticed that. Essentially, he hasn't gone gracefully, has he? So he resigned, but he resigned as leader of the Conservative Party and said he was staying on as PM with no intention of giving up or leaving his actual constituency seat either. And Dominic Cummings was tweeting at the time, you need to get him cleared out right now, because this speech will be his way of buying time to find another route back in, because he doesn't believe that he should be gone. And when you marry that up with reports of Boris Johnson now telling advisors that he will be back in power within a year, when you also look at this movement within the Conservative base to get Boris Johnson on some kind of ballot alongside Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, when you add all of that up together, as well as him continuing to posture as a full throttle PM, throwing hand grenades and flying fighter jets and everything, dear Lord, then you see someone who is potentially posturing to be in a position to hop back in should things go wrong for either Rishi or Liz Truss. Now, whether that comes off or not, who knows? There was lots of talk, I'm told, when Margaret Thatcher left of being able to bring her back in, and that never happened. But we've got a particularly fractious situation at the moment. And certainly whatever happens, this narrative massively undermines the whole dynamics going on within the Conservative Party and how that's viewed by the rest of the country. So as long as he stays there as an MP, I fully regard him as a menace.
And Drew Hendry, does this weaken the United Kingdom?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything that's been done by Westminster, for decades they've been weakening the United Kingdom because they've just been ignoring the needs of Scotland, the needs of Wales, and quite patently at the moment they're also going to ride roughshod over the needs of Northern Ireland just now. So, they have no credibility in terms of this union. It's all about Westminster. It's all about what they want to do. It's particularly it's heightened because it's all about the Brexiteers. It's all about the likes of Boris Johnson and Truss and Sunak, and what they want to sell to the surprisingly small constituency that drives all of this. just now. So yes, they're weakening the union, but I think what's also turbocharged that is the fact that you can look across at countries like Ireland, you can look across at other countries that are similar size to Scotland or even smaller than Scotland, and see how well they're doing without being shackled to Westminster or something like it, it's quite illuminating. I had a chat with Neil Richmond about the situation in the Republic of Ireland on the Scotland's Choice podcast just a couple of weeks ago, and I posed the question, because it's often said in fun, to him, would Ireland ever vote in a referendum to rejoin the UK? And you can imagine the response that got from there. So yes, they're weakening the United Kingdom, but that job's been well underway for some considerable period of time.
Now let's move on to the Supreme Court reference. Now there's a lot of legal talk in the next bit. So what I'm referring to is this document here, which is in the matter of a reference by the Lord Advocate to the Supreme Court of United Kingdom in relation to the question of whether a referendum on Scottish independence contained in the proposed bill relates to reserved matters. So we'll try and do this bit in plain English. But the document I have in front of me is the Scottish Chief Law Officer's submission to the Supreme Court, saying that perhaps the Scottish Government does actually have the power to hold an independence referendum on its own. And I'm halfway through it, Drew. I'm sure you've read all of it. But I noticed earlier on, right at the start, that the Lord Advocate is saying that legal opinion is divided. A lot of people 20 years ago, a lot of legal experts said, no, clearly independence would be a reserved matter, so it's not up to Scotland to discuss independence. But it does make the point that lots of other legal experts, probably more recently, have said that it could well be competent. So first of all, let me get your general opinions, Drew Henry, on the legality of it. Is it about legality, or is it really about the political weight in the situation where the SNP keeps winning elections in Scotland?
Well, I think it'd be pretty bizarre if, having had devolution in Scotland, that it somehow legally weakened their right to decide in their future. And I think it's really important that in the face of the stubborn refusal of Westminster and successive candidates and prime ministers to recognise the democratic right of the Scottish people to have a referendum, that we have to have this tested legally. Absolutely the best way to run a democracy is to test public opinion, to have that done properly, and that's all that the Scottish Government are trying to do with the mandate they have in the Scottish Parliament, which has as if anyone watching this needs to be reminded, but there's a majority of MSPs who are elected on a mandate to hold an independence referendum. It's quite bizarre that they use this line at Westminster that certain MPs can decide whether or not that happens, how long into the future that might happen, and whether or not they can ever happen. There has to be a route for Scotland to be able to decide its future. Otherwise, this is not a union of equals. This is not a democratic union. This is something that is, verging on colonialisation, if that's the case, if that's what they're saying. So it has to be tested legally, and I think it's absolutely right that not only have the Scottish Government asked the Lord Advocate to take this forward, but I think the fact that the SNP are also asking to make a submission into this from a political perspective is also entirely right, so that we can put forward the point that people have been voting successively for this mandate, and it has to be delivered.
Mike Galsworthy, I'm wondering what I know you don't represent England, you haven't asked everybody, but in your opinion, do you think people in England will say it's a sovereign right of UK to control the UK and it's not up to Scotland to ask for permission to leave it? What do you think ordinary people's opinions might be?
I don't know, because I haven't seen the question poll, but I would imagine you've got the full range of opinions here. I mean, as for myself, I generally believe in the power of unions, but a good union has to have certain properties. It has to be mutually beneficial for the peoples of the union, and it has to have fair balance in say and governance of the union, and also any union worth its salt has to have, a door out should people wish to take the door out. And for example, our membership of the EU, some people felt that it wasn't economically beneficial. Some people felt that we didn't have a good, balance of voice and say in it. I would disagree on both those counts. I think that, well, economic data and circumstances have proven that it was actually beneficial to us. And I can certainly tell you in science, we did have a lot of say and a lot of governance and a lot of design. And in terms of leaving, we've shown that you can leave. There is a mechanism for that, Article 50. And we didn't have to go to the European Union and say, please, please, can we have a referendum? Because it was understood that in a union such as that, everyone who is a participant, every entity that is a participant, is a willing participant with sovereign control over whether they are part of that union or not. So with the Scottish situation, in 2014, I thought, stay with the union. Why wouldn't you? I didn't get it. But now I have a lot more sympathies with those that want to leave. One of the real triggers for me was actually about these trade deals. Because in the EU, if Scotland were an independent country within the EU, it would have a veto over any trade deals that it didn't like, because it would say, no, that is not good for our people. We are responsible for our people. And so we put a veto on that. Even Wallonia, the region of Wallonia, not even a country, but a region of a small country, actually had a veto in order that to do a trade deal which impacts on different sectors, every sovereign entity down to that atomic level actually had a right to say no. But if you're looking at these trade deals that Westminster is forcing upon the entire populace and other nations of its union, to my mind, that's abuse. And I can, much as though I would love Scotland and England to march together for a more progressive world and back towards Europe and building a better place, I can totally understand the frustration of Scottish people that say, we never vote these jokers in, and now they're telling us what trade deals are going to be jammed down our throats, and that just doesn't apply to other unions. What is this? So when it comes to legalities, it perplexes me that Scotland and the government of Scotland, as it has been set up, would have to go and ask a superior entity within the union as to whether they are allowed to determine whether they want to leave that union. Like I said before, the UK didn't go and ask the EU, are we allowed to have a referendum on this? And I think for Scotland, those advocating independence, it is on their risk, their political risk, their risk of damage to the whole course of events going forward, if they want to take this on, if they want to push for this. I think that's where the responsibility and the decision making lies in a union of willing participants.
Yeah, I want to take up one point. Mike's just raised a point, Drew, about I feel like sympathetic people in England, because you, of course, have to ply your trade in Westminster during parliamentary time. What do you say to people in England who say, of course you are a country, of course you have a right to self-determination, but we would like you to stay with us?
Well, I'd say I can completely understand that point of view. Listen, it's entirely honourable for people to be pro the Union of the UK. That's a democratic position that people should be absolutely allowed and to express and to say their views. It's absolutely right that people in Scotland can say, I don't believe in independence. That's a democratic position. But if, as I say, if Scotland votes, as it has done time and time again, the last 10 elections voted the SNP into power. If it votes for MSPs with a specific mandate to have an independence referendum, as they did in in the last election, then there is no logical reason that should be denied. And and just to pick up the benefits for people in England, I think Scottish independence will be the best thing that could ever happen to the people of the rest of the UK, because it will force the Westminster, which is stuck in its rut, its ever decreasing circles, as I said earlier. It'll force Westminster to address the need to actually look to the 21st century as opposed to back to the 20th, 19th, 18th, and 17th century, as it so often does. There are a lot of people who are losing out because of the overheated economy in London and the southeast, who are just not getting a fair deal either. And I think, as I say, seeing Scotland being able to make its own decisions with the full powers of independence as an example for them, I think will actually lead to greater change for England.
Yeah, somebody on my Twitter the other day from England says something about, do you not like us? Is this because will I still be welcome if I come to Scotland? And I've said, you're misunderstanding the whole thing. Of course you're welcome. Come up as soon as you like and spend plenty of money here. But it's not about that either. But it seems to me politically both Starmer and the Conservative candidates are trying to demonise Scotland. They're saying, well, Starmer is saying, of course, the very last thing I'll do, I'll talk to anyone, but I won't talk to the SNP. We're not doing deals with them. So is that going to be an issue again in the next election?
I think that's a bit unfair. I wouldn't conflate demonising Scotland with demonising the SNP. The Labour Party is a political party. The SNP is another political party. To a degree, it's fair game to have a pop at each other. And also for those that are pro-union and do want to see, Scotland and England sort of working together, when they attack the notion of independence, I hope for the most part it's not seen as an attack on the Scottish people or we don't like your attitude. But I hope that for those that are unionist, it's about trying to make the case for the ongoing relationship. But I think that one of the most destructive forces against a good, healthy union has actually been the Conservative and Unionist Party. Their attitude has just stunk all the way through.
Yeah. Well, there's a bit more complexity to that, Mike, because there are two things at play with the Labour Party and Keir Starmer at the moment. First of all, again, ignoring Scotland's position, he said very clearly and publicly that no customs union, no freedom of movement, no membership of the EU forever is his political position. That's not the position of Scotland. And also, the SNP isn't just a political party in Scotland, it's also the party of government. So by saying that you're not going to work or look to cooperate in any way with the SNP, ahead of a UK general election, I think poses different problems. But I do think you've got a good point in that it's fair game in politics, for parties to have a knock at each other, especially pre-election. I think the difficulty for the Labour Party, as we saw yesterday, is that as it continues to deny democracy for Scotland, there are voices speaking out. First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, yesterday said, yeah, absolutely, Scotland has a majority elected for it on an independence mandate. They should have their choice. And that's a break with what the rest of the Labour Party are saying, particularly Keir Starmer and Anna Salwar here in Scotland. So, I think the Labour Party do have to be held under some scrutiny on this position.
Okay, and just to wind up that one. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for that comment. I'm just wondering whether in attacking the SNP, I know that Labour people have said, they have made it clear it's the SNP we're attacking, not the people of Scotland. I don't want to suggest that they're anti-Scottish, but they are. Well, if the Scottish people keep voting the SNP, that's maybe a bit hard to say. It's not you we're attacking, just the people that you always vote for.
Can I say one more thing about referendums? I think we've really developed, because of Brexit in particular, an unhealthy fear of referendums. And I think that you can see in other countries, such as Switzerland, it is a useful tool. And one of the problems is people say, leaving the EU, this vote about Brexit, this is forever, this is for keeps. And you can't prejudice the whole decision, you can't, the next generations coming through are going to be entitled to their say as well.
Exactly so.
And with regard to Scotland, it's perfectly legitimate that it's an ongoing question. And then the notion becomes, oh, but you keep on doing it again and again until you get your way. Okay, but then let's say you get your way and Scotland becomes independent and things go badly. Well, there should always be the open question of coming back into the union or reforming a union that has better underlying dynamics. Like, life is long and history is much, much longer. And the more you go through political processes which are mature and educational, the more you try out different options, the more likely you are over the long term to have sensible management, I believe. So one of the things that I think we really, really need to nix in this is this notion of be all and end all referendums that are forever, and rather have discussions about what are sensible restructurings that we can do and that we can have votes on and that we try out. I mean, Brexit is, let's face it, an experiment. It hasn't gone very well, but it's an experiment. We've learned a lot from it. Our public's learned a lot from it. The Scots have learned a lot from it about their dynamic with Westminster. Europe's learned a lot from it. And it isn't forever in this current solution. And similarly, Scotland's relationship with England and the rest of the UK, it is not going to stay crystallized as this forever. It is going to have reshaping and dynamics. And so we should be thinking more in those maturer long-term solutions, because it isn't just a binary case of you're part of the union and you suck it up, or you're independent and we never talk to each other again. That's ridiculous. That's for the birds. We've got to have more mature discussions about how democracy on these isles and in our continent actually works for all of the populations therein.
Yeah, well, I was going to wind it up, but this is very interesting. I wouldn't go on for too long. Well, let me just ask you, Drew Henry, about the whole question of how do you organise a constitution in a 21st century democracy? Because the point Mike raised there is about, do we have referenda more frequently, as for instance they do in the state of California, and of course famously in Switzerland. Britain, of course, famously is a parliamentary democracy. The number one sovereign is the House of Commons, of course. So people used to say, if you use a referendum, that's only to get you out of a political problem. So Cameron only had his referendum on Scotland because he thought he'd win it. And also he had his referendum in Europe because he thought he'd win that. So can referenda be abused? Can they just be used to try and get what you want, although it didn't work for Cameron?
Well, politics can also always be abused one way or the other. But if people who are in power are choosing to abuse it, I mean, that's just the way of life. But I would agree with Mike on the point that the referenda is a poll. It's a way of asking people what they want, what they believe. I think it's a really important part of a democratic toolkit. Do I think it should be used for everything? No. Do I think it should be used for things that are important? Then absolutely. But one thing is absolutely crystal clear, and I'll finish on this because I know you're running out of time, is that the people of Scotland voted to have a referendum. They should be given a referendum.
Okay, on that democratic note then, I better wind it up. So thanks for watching us today. So I think I've overrun a bit. We did start a bit late, and since then I've lost track of time anyway. But that's what happens when you have good guests on the programme. So I'd like to thank Mike Galsworthy for joining us today. That was excellent to have you. So thanks for being on the show. I hope to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
And to Drew Hendry and Inverness. So thanks for joining us. And I'm sure we will see you again, Drew, but thanks still.
Thank you very much indeed.
I'll just draw this to a close. So that was a really interesting discussion today. And so finally we were on talking about the reference from the Scottish Government's senior law officer to the Supreme Court to decide on whether Scotland can have its referendum, which is scheduled for October next year. The Supreme Court will start discussing the legal submissions in about October of this year. So that's Scotland Sunday for today on the 23rd of July. So thank you for watching, and can I remind you that we are entirely supported by our subscribers, and if you'd like to be one of our subscribers, please look at the website which is on the screen below. Now, if you'd like to start a direct debit even at £5 a month, hundreds of people have done that. And that's our only source of income, so that's what keeps Broadcasting in Scotland going. So, and please pass us on if you haven't come across us before. Tell your friends about us, and that's it for today. So we're going to be back tomorrow with the 7 o'clock news. Scotland at 7, Monday to Friday. So one of my colleagues will take you then, and I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Bye now.
Just waiting for the delay to play through, and I'll hook you all back up together. Okay, I'm ending the stream.